No cameraman.
No cameraman. This is a two-man show. Welcome to the Mount of Klein's Run here in Wrightsville. Well, kind of East Prospect area. If you know the York area, which Matt does not.
I don't.
Then you would know.
New to me.
You would know this spot. But welcome to Klein's Run, and we are doing mountains today as we journey through the world, and we take this Lenten journey to the cross. We are studying mountains today, and so one thing to know is that this is actually I'd say this is a pretty relatable mount for what we see in the Bible, because honestly, when you get over to the Mediterranean area and Middle East, there's not very big mountains like we have the Appalachian Trail even, or the Rockies. They're not big mountains that the Bible talks about. They're kind of like hills.
Large hills.
So, large hills. So we're on this large hill and overlooking the Susquehanna River. And so it's kind of like the Jordan River, I guess you could make a stretch. But yeah, we're out here in nature because it's such a beautiful Wednesday today.
It is a very nice day.
So let's talk about mountains. Okay, so what makes mountains so important in the Bible? Like water was super important, and the desert's super important. Last week, if you didn't watch water, I'd say that one's really significant. And where does fresh water come from? Living water come from? Mountains. It comes off of the mountainside. And so today we're talking about mountains. And so why are they important in the Bible? Well, one reason that they're important is that sacrifices were made on mountains. And I actually brought Matt up here to sacrifice him.
We didn't talk about this.
I didn't tell him yet, but
I wasn't prepared.
So no, we're not doing a sacrifice today on the mountain. But on Mount Carmel, the Lord tells Elijah to meet him there, this Mount Carmel, and they bring the worshipers of Baal, or however you want to say that god, that false god. And these worshipers of Baal have abandoned the Lord's ways. And so Elijah takes them up to this mountain, and he tells that they kind of have a competition there, where it's like, okay, so you worship this God, but I worship the Lord God of Israel. So let's have a little fire competition. And so they have, sticks piled up, and they have these altars that they make for a burnt sacrifice, which is a very common sacrifice in the Bible. And so the worshipers of Baal, they're there praising him all day and saying, call down fire and burn this up. And they're like cutting themselves and trying to get their
doing
God,
everything they can.
Anything they can to get their God to call fire down. And so Elijah makes them look foolish by praying to God and saying, he actually takes it a step further and says, make this as wet as possible, get 4 jugs of water, dump it on, do it 3 times. And so it's a very wet altar. And then he asks God to call down fire and make them believe in him. And then God does it. He calls down fire on this mountain, Mount Carmel, and lights up this altar. And so God, his presence is there. He demonstrates himself in that burnt offering that happens there. And he provides an answer to his prayers with an all-consuming fire. So that is in 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 36 to 39. Then we also have Mount Horeb, and on this mountain, God appears to Moses as a fire within a burning bush. But the bush does not actually burn. And so God warns Moses, don't come too close to this bush. And there's an element of God's holiness in there. That there's this fire that is not consuming the bush, but it's there, and and so that's the presence of God, just like it was for Elijah on Mount Carmel. On Mount Horeb is the presence of God where Moses encounters God, and that's that moment where God tells Moses that he will rescue the Egyptians from slavery and oppression and bring them to a good spacious land flowing with milk and honey. And so that's in Exodus chapter 3. And so that's just another mountain. And also on that mountain, we talked about Elijah on Mount Carmel. Now we have Elijah on Mount Horeb, the same mountain of Moses. And he journeyed there after his experience on Mount Carmel. And he came to Horeb, and he stood in the presence of God. Once more, we're talking about the presence of God on a mountain. And the Lord passed by, which was preceded by a powerful wind that tore apart the mountains, and an earthquake and a fire. But God was not in those things. He was in the quiet whisper that came after. And so God met Elijah on Mount Horeb in a quiet whisper. And so we're seeing just God's presence all throughout the Bible.
In various ways.
In various ways on these mountains. And that's in 1 Kings chapter 19. Also, we have Mount Sinai, and I could talk about mountains all day.
We found very quickly there are many mountains.
There are so many mountains in the Bible, but Mount Sinai actually is the ultimate mountain of God, and it's the same mountain as Mount Horeb, which kind of blew my mind.
Why
because
don't we call them the same thing?
I don't know why we don't call them the same thing, but it was crazy to me because my whole life I'm hearing about these separate things that happened in separate places, but it's the same place.
Spot.
It's the same holy place where God meets his people. And so both are the mountain where Moses received the 10 Commandments from God. So that's Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai as we know it, where Moses received the 10 Commandments. So we have in Exodus chapter 20 and we have in Deuteronomy chapter 4 where they're the same experience and called that mountain. And so we also have, and this is my last one for now, I promise. For now, it's my last mountain, Mount Moriah. And that is where God asks Abraham to take his beloved son and into the region of Moriah and sacrifice him as a burnt offering, to sacrifice his own son. Now, this is not the calf that was sacrificed on Mount Carmel. This is a human, a person. And God does not delight in human sacrifice. So why would God ask him to do this? Other than to test Abraham's obedience to God, willingness to sacrifice his own son, and then foreshadow the very same sacrifice that would happen on that mountain when Jesus came.
There's a lot of depth in that passage.
A lot of depth. So Mount Moriah is, God provides this ram at the last moment in Genesis chapter 22. And so Mount Moriah is also the location where Solomon built the temple. It's this hot spot of God's presence. So this is where, even in Judaism, in Christianity, and in Islam today, this is a hot spot of God's presence where the Holy Temple's been built over and over again. And now today, it is, Mount Moriah is also that region that's called the Temple Mount. And so currently it's the spot of a mosque for the Muslim faith because it's these same stories of that mountain in all these three big religions of the world. And so this region is what we're going to focus on today, this hilly area of Jerusalem that is where Mount Moriah is and where the temple is and where Jesus walked in Jerusalem. And this region of hills is also the location of Mount Zion in the city of David, and this is where our Lord was crucified and where he promised he would return, is Mount Zion, and there's a lot of futuristic aspects to that. So Matt actually has a story to share with us from Matthew chapter 17 about this area of Mount Moriah, the hills of Jerusalem, and something that happened there. So please share with us.
This is Matthew chapter 17, beginning in verse 1. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up the 3 shelters, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Do not tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead."
What's going on there, Matt?
Well,
that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. I think the first thing to note is that Matthew was writing this gospel account to the Jewish people, and so as early Jewish Christians would have read this account, they would have immediately thought of another mountaintop moment that you didn't even mention earlier.
No.
In Exodus chapter 24, when Moses and Joshua go up and meet the presence of the Lord on the top. I think it's Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai. Yeah. Popular place.
It is. Yeah. A lot of stuff happening. The second thing that I think that we should take from this is that Peter's immediate reaction. Peter is one of Jesus' closest companions, and his immediate reaction is talking and and blabbering and just going on and on. I can build tents, Lord, one for you and one for him and one for him and then
I would probably do the same thing. I mean, if there was a transfiguration that happened right here,
yeah,
I probably would be the talker.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you might you might not be. But yeah, what's the alternative to blabbering like Peter?
Yeah, basically he's trying to preserve this moment. He's trying to make this something that is more understandable for him. And what he really just needs to do is be quiet. And we see that the voice from heaven cuts him off in mid sentence, stops him from just continuing on, and tells him that there's something larger going on here than what can be preserved in a tent.
Wow.
And then, yeah, and I think that we need to take note of what happens immediately after this passage as well. Jesus and his disciples descend the mountain, and they immediately go back into performing miracles, healing people, giving sight to the blind. Jesus is telling parables, continuing his ministry, and it leads right up to his arrest and crucifixion. And coming off of this mountaintop experience, they re-enter life. They experience the valley, yeah. And the next time, and I think this is maybe the most beautiful part, the next time that Jesus is on a mountain with those with whom he's most close is his ascension, after he has been crucified and resurrected. And he tells his friends, I am with you always, from mountaintop to mountaintop, with the valley in between. Jesus is there always.
So that's Mount Tabor there, where the Transfiguration happens?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's Mount Tabor where the Transfiguration happens, and it's the Mount of Olives where Jesus is ascended.
Yeah. Wonderful. The Mount of Olives, that's also where Jesus stood and wept over Jerusalem. So we have these moments on the mountaintop where some of them are like these holy moments of the presence of God. Other ones, I think of Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah.
That's not, to me, a very beautiful moment that happens on the mountain. He goes up there and he's going to sacrifice his own son. Right. So sacrifices happen on the mountain. Not just these beautiful holy moments that we just love and like the high moments in life, but also those low and very challenging things, the sacrifices that we make, which I think is a good parallel to Lent, which is the season we're in right now, where we're making sacrifices during Lent. And some of those happen on the mountaintop. Some of those happen on the journey up the mountain as well. Something I wanted to mention was we have in the book of Psalms, the Psalms of Ascent. And in these Psalms of Ascent, I believe it's Psalm 120 to 134, or I think it's a little further than that actually. I think it's 17 Psalms, where they recite these Psalms and sing them, the Jewish people would, on their way to Jerusalem. And Jerusalem's the highest point. It's the highest city in Israel. And so
still just a hill.
It's still just a hill like we're on right now. But it, like anywhere you came from in Israel, you would have to journey up the mount to get to Jerusalem. And it was kind of a long journey. And so they would sing these Psalms of Ascent, which are Psalms of praise. And so they would be these songs of hope and joy. And in the midst of the struggle of ascending that mount and getting to that holy place, they would sing songs about the excitement of worshiping God in that holy place in Jerusalem. And so I think we can sing Psalms of Ascent on our way to church as we go into the place of worship to sing praises to God, but also in the midst of our struggle in the valley below Jerusalem when we're on our way up to that holy place. And so I think of Lent, and I think of the season we're in and the journey we're on towards Easter, towards the cross,
towards a mountaintop,
towards a mountain and Mount Calvary, which is not, once again, that's a sacrifice that happens on a mount, the same Mount Moriah, those hills of Jerusalem. That's Mount Calvary is a very visible hill outside of the city gates of Jerusalem. And so people would see that walking by. So on that journey over to Mount Calvary, we have another sacrifice that happens. The sacrifice of a father's beloved son that happens on Mount Calvary. And so that is not a high and holy moment that happens on a mount, but it's a beautiful sacrifice that is made for God's people. And so I just wanted to draw that parallel to as we sing these Psalms of Ascent up to Jerusalem, but that's also where on those mounts is where Jesus made that sacrifice. That's where the transfiguration happened. That's where the ascension happened. And so these holy moments, but also these very divine struggles, I would call them, happen on mounts. So what does it mean for you in your life to have a mountaintop experience? Because I'm thinking of mountaintop experiences for me, and they're not all wonderful,
right.
But like, what does it mean for you, Matt?
It gives me assurance that there's something more beautiful going on than what I'm able to understand. It gives me assurance that it's not my life decisions necessarily that determine the outcome of life. That there's more going on. That when things are dark in the valley, I'm still able to recognize the mountaintop. That I'm still able to recognize that my eyes are not able to comprehend all that's going on around me.
Yeah, it's always darker in the valley, but light's hitting on the mountaintop, and whether it's the light of God's holy presence, which is, you got to shield yourself from that because it's so beautiful and holy, or if it's just the light of the sun hitting the top of the mountain and in a very beautiful struggle, light is always shining on the mountaintop there. So, but for me, I think of a mountaintop experience in my life, like you said, where it's not all about our choices that we're making. I remember a struggle that I had in my life where I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do for my school? What am I going to do for my future, my career? So I drove to the top of a mountain. I hiked to the top, and then I just started talking to God on the mountaintop, and it wasn't pretty. I mean, I was yelling a little bit, and I was upset. But I left that mountaintop experience with a divine kind of peace, but also a struggle that I had with God. So I had a struggle with God on the mountaintop, and I came down from that realizing that really the best thing I got out of it was, no matter what I do, I know that He is for me and He is with me. And so that's a mountaintop experience in my life, not just the high moments and the holy moments of my life, but the struggles of my life that really defined who I am. And I met God on the mountaintop. And so that's all I see in the Bible, is people meeting God on the mountaintop, whether it's good or bad. You're meeting God up there. And so here we are on the mountaintop today and meeting God. So one other thing is, there's a moment in the Bible where Jesus talks about having faith, faith that can move a mountain, and it doesn't look like a lot of faith. It looks like a mustard seed. It looks like something small. And so I wanted to talk to you about faith and what it looks like to have faith in the midst of the struggles of life, but also what it has when you're on the mountaintop to have faith. And maybe you're not having that divine revelation of God's presence on the mountaintop, but what does it look like to even hold on to that small nugget of faith that can do incredible things in your life and move mountains? So I don't know if you have mountain moving experiences in your life.
I think the thing that I'll bring out here is that faith of a mustard seed still leaves room for unbelief. It doesn't discount doubt or separation or absence that we feel. But it just says that even if there's just this little glimmer of there is something more, then we are assured of that, and we can look to that.
Right. So if you're struggling right now to have faith in God, I want to challenge you to come to the Mount with us. Come to Klein's Run. Come to High Point Park.
We'll be here all day.
We'll be here all day.
No.
Oh man. But meet God on that mountaintop. Bring your mustard seed. Bring whatever you have of your faith in God, and He will meet you on that mountaintop. It might look like a struggle. It might look like a sacrifice. It might look like a divine revelation of God's presence. I don't know what it's going to look like for you, but I know that I've had mountaintop experiences. Matt has had mountaintop experiences. And something that you said earlier that blew my mind is that when I think about the mounts in the Bible and they're just these small hills, what did you say earlier that was really powerful?
We're a lot closer to the mountaintop than we think. The valley isn't as deep as we perceive it to be. Mm-hmm. And with how hilly the city of Jerusalem and its surrounding area is, the mountaintops aren't that far apart either.
Right.
And
yeah, a lot of the mountains that we mentioned are really close together and all encompass in those hills of Jerusalem. So even in the valley, you're not that far from the mountain, and even dry bones can come out of those valleys and come to life. So let's leave everyone with that today.
We'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, and maybe you know this song, but the Highlands is about psalm of ascent. And so we're going to sing that to close. God bless. See you next week.
All right. Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide? Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you graced the other side. Oh, how long have I chased rivers from lonely seas to where they rise, against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more nor less inclined. I would search and stop at nothing. You're just not that hard to find. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain, and I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. In the valley, in the valleys, all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. 'Cause you're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache, all the same. Oh, how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend the path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinners past. And oh, how fast would you come running if just to shadow me through the night, trace my steps through all my failures and walk me out the other side. For who could dare ascend that mountain, that valleyed hill called Calvary, but for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain, I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are, so I will praise you in the valley all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. 'Cause you're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache, all the same. Whatever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move the mountains. Wherever I stand, if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song ever sent, my song ever sent. Oh, oh, from the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upward from a deep but empty grave. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain, I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are, so I will praise you in the valley all the same. No less God within the shadow, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache, all the same.